Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Kaiya. Today we're going to be talking about 200 Stab Wounds. Specifically, we're going to be talking about and reviewing their brand new album, Manual Manic Procedures, which did come out June 28th of this year, 2024, from Metal Blade Records. I'm also going to be reviewing and talking about their debut album, Slave to the Scalpel, which came out off of Maggot Stomp Records, November 12th, 2021. So I have not talked about 200 Stab Wounds at all on my channel, which is why I'm kind of throwing back to their debut album, just because since the release of this second record, I finally got to sit down and really listen to this band. I have obviously heard about them. I just recently talked about them on my Metal Monday stream because they were touring with Dying Fetus earlier this year. They're also on another tour right now in the fall with one of my favorite BDM bands, Stabbing. So 200 Stab Wounds, if you are not familiar with them, they are considered to be what is a new term that I just learned, which is called a revival OSDM band, meaning old school death metal, obviously. So this band, including Frozen Soul, Tomb Mold, you could even throw in Sanguish Sugarbog in there. They're considered to be this kind of revival old school death metal sound, which basically means that they are obviously a new generation of young metalheads, young metal bands that are mimicking and imitating, there we go, God, imitating this old school death metal sound in their music. So I know right off the bat that there's some, discourse on the internet about these revival death metal bands. Obviously, Tomb Mold's been in the news because of how they look. 200 Stab Wounds has been called 200 Wimp Wounds by some people because I think it's growing pains. At the end of the day, I think that this is genuinely growing pains. I have said this so many times on my channel recently, but the OGs, we've had the OGs. They've had their time. They've made their best records already. We are in a new generation of music right now, and that's a good thing. And it's also just, a part of life. It's a part of the growing process, so it's kind of bittersweet. Eventually our OGs are not going to be here, and we're going to have to rely on the next wave of death metal bands. And right now, these new bands, 200 Stab Wounds, Sanguish Sugarbog, Tomb Mold, Frozen Soul, all of these newer bands, Undeath even, these are the new generation of death metal bands that we have. Not all of them, obviously. A lot of the people that grew up with the OG death metal bands, that's what they love. That's what they stick to. That's what they mostly listen to. And so hearing some of these newer bands trying to imitate that sound, it just feels a little bit like a farce, to them, which is understandable. But I also think that there's a lot of people that are genuinely excited about these bands and genuinely think that they're very talented and that they have come up with some very, very good music. And like I said, growing pains. This is all about trying to come up with a new generation of death metal, So right off the bat, we're going to start with their debut album first, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions reviewing that album, and then we'll go into their new album. So if you want to just skip to my thoughts on their newer album, then you can just skip to that section. I'll have the timestamps below. But first, let's talk about Slave to the Scalpel, which, as I said, came out in November of 2021 from Maggot Stomp Records. First of all, let's talk about Maggot Stomp for a second. Okay, this is a relatively new label from 2018, and they have a lot of these revival old school death metal bands signed to their label. I mean, just looking at it, obviously you've got 200 Stab Wounds, you have Frozen Souls on there, Fluids has some records off of there. I know Undeath had one of their projects on there. So you have a lot of these nice younger bands. So for Slave to the Scalpel, you're going to get that kind of contemporary death metal sound. So I really enjoyed this album, actually. I think that my favorite parts about this record is just how short and sweet it is. It's 9 tracks coming in at 26 minutes and 59 seconds, so technically 27 minutes, but you get my point. The longest song on here is Phallic Filth, which is just under 4 minutes long, and I got a lot of different elements in this album. Again, old school death metal revival, so I'm getting, Cannibal Corpse, some Dying Fetus, some Suffocation, some Obituary. I'm getting a little bit of Mortician because there's some very nice ambient, kind of creepy elements throughout this. And I very much enjoyed Skin Milk, the opening track. I feel like that is like just peak enjoyment for me when it comes to like Mortician. Is one of the things that I love about Mortician is, some people could say like, the horror movie samples are a little too much, but I think it's kind of cool and it adds to that ambient sound, I guess, that you get with those albums. And that's what they're playing around here essentially. It's very good atmospheric instrumental sections. It really helps to like open up the record and really introduce you to who 200 Stab Wounds is. And I like it. So for me, the strongest songs, honestly, are the first 3. Skin Milk, Tow Rope Around the Throat, and Stifling Stew are absolute bangers. I think the weakest one for me on this track is honestly Itty Bitty Pieces, purely just because I feel like that title alone, that sentence right there, is a bit corny. It's a little cringy for me. The lyrics, I think, are pretty cool, though, when you look at them as a whole, especially when it comes to, slave to the scalpel, blood on my hands, remain scattered lifeless on my nightstand. Like, it's kind of bars, but it's just itty bitty pieces. I feel like, I don't know. It's just a little corny for me. I don't really know how else to explain it, but I think the title track is a little bit boring and doesn't really leave anything for me to remember it by. I do think that it's just kind of a boring track. Phallic Filth, I think, has some really great melodic elements to it. Another song on this record that really showcases that kind of contemporary metal sound is the track Drilling Your Head. Now, from what I understand after listening to these 2 albums, as far as like this contemporary sound, it has this bounce to it, and I'm going to try and explain it as best as I can, but it's got almost like this, and Sanguis Sugarbog had it too when I saw them live. I think I mentioned in my show review how they had like a subwoofer and everything during their live show. They have this kind of hip-hop bounce to it, and you can feel it. I don't know really how else to explain it, but it's got this bounce to it. And it's similar to how, if you've noticed, current day pop music and country music, especially like modern country, has that kind of trap rap, hip hop production to it in the drums. So it's kind of similar, although it's not as like obviously hip hop trap that you're hearing within the metal music within this, album specifically. It has elements that are kind of similar. I hear it in all of the like super trendy metalcore, deathcore, and new metal that is making waves right now. So that is just the contemporary sound, in all honesty. So all of the newer bands that are coming out right now, they're all going to have that contemporary beat and sound to it. You're not really going to hear that too much with the OGs that come out with newer records, but you'll hear it a little bit, but like not as much, because their roots are set in the old times, if that makes sense. So Drilling Your Head is a really great example of this that I definitely heard. I really enjoyed the song X-Braided Spatter too. I think this is a perfect example of this kind of, hip-hop trendy bounce that we're hearing within this song, within this music. So it's again just kind of a popular form of doing your instrumentals, of doing your rhythm. So I think that could also be something that is like turning off a lot of people to this kind of revival old school death metal, is because it's got that contemporary bounce to it. It's not it is and it isn't old school death metal, you know. I think the weakest part for me on this entire record is the vocals, honestly. I'm not a huge fan of the kind of higher sounding vocals that he's doing. They're not even like a high scream. It's just the way they sound. They just kind of sound a little higher, and there's this I guess like filter on them that I'm not digging. It's not clicking with me. I think after a few listens though, after sitting with this album some more, I think it might start to grow on me, because honestly it reminds me a lot of 6 Feet Under. It reminds me a lot of Chris Barnes. It really does. And it's not so much like the Cookie Monster very much, but I don't know, it's just a little off-putting for me personally. So I will say though that even though I don't enjoy Steve's vocals on this debut, I do think that he improved overall on the sound of his voice on the next record, which we can go ahead and get into. But for Slave to the Scalpel, I think it's a solid 7 out of 10. Like I said, the first 3 tracks are just a banger, and like I mentioned before, it's a short and sweet, album. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's just something you can put on and just keep repeating and repeating. And one of the best techniques that they use within this album is all of the songs they just flow together. So it's like a continuous vibe. It's very easy to listen to, and you can just get through it without really needing to, have a lot of pauses or breaks, so it doesn't break up your listening experience. So like I said, the first 3 songs, they just flow like a river into each other, and it's very, very pleasant and easy to listen to. Now let's get into their new record, Manual Manic Procedures. So right off the bat, I will say I'm not a fan of the album cover for this record. I think it kind of, again, makes me think of 6 Feet Under. This is giving me Nightmares of the Decomposed. It's all over it, mixed with like some Carcass Worship. So, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Pathologist, some of their covers. So it's just a little corny for me personally. Now, this is a new record that is off of Metal Blade. So Metal Blade is kind of a huge jump from Maggot Stomp, because where Maggot Stomp is this newer, smaller label that's got all these new generation bands, when you sign to Metal Blade, that's a big deal. This is, of course, a record label that have done every single Cannibal Corpse and 6 Feet Under band album. So, you're working with some talent here. And so right off the bat, like I said, Steve's voice has improved a lot in terms of like production. I think they're a lot easier to listen to on this record for sure. And overall, I think that this album still has that contemporary sound to it. Now, the one thing about this record I will say is it's not as they don't play around. They do play around with the atmospheric instrumental sections. I mean, they have an entire instrumental track, Led to the Chamber / Liquefied, which is one of my favorite songs, honestly. But the way this album opens up is not my favorite. I think that their debut honestly opened up better, in my opinion, and just really helped kind of like, I guess, paint the atmosphere of their record better. So for me personally, the first 3 songs did not really click with me. Hands of Eternity, Gross Abuse, and the title track were okay at best. For me, they weren't super memorable. It did start to pick up in the middle of the album with songs like Release the Stench, and then of course their instrumental track, Led to the Chamber / Liquefied. I thought that was a banger. And then Flesh from Within, I also thought was a banger. Those were really solid songs. I think honestly for me, the worst song on this entire album is track 8, Ride the Flatline. This does remind me a lot of like Chaos Horrific in terms of the production and the instrumentals. I was kind of getting some Bloodblind, that single that Cannibal Corpse released to promote that record. And I wasn't a fan of the vocals. So if this track didn't really click with you and you're kind of wondering why, a lot of it has to do with the feature on this track, which is Jamie Morgan. Now, he is from a band called Code Orange. They used to be called Code Orange Kids, and then they changed it in 2014 to just Code Orange. But they are a metalcore band out of Pittsburgh, and you can tell. You can tell. So if you are not a big fan of metalcore vocals specifically, that is probably a reason why this track was a total miss for you. For me, it's very hit or miss for metalcore. Not saying I don't enjoy it. I mean, there are some very good metalcore and deathcore bands that I enjoy. But it is all dependent on how you kind of mix that into the music. And for me personally, I don't think that it worked, especially because Jamie was given kind of this like longer verse within the bridge of this song. And it was just... it didn't work for me. It didn't mix very well with Steve's like death metal vocals, which I was already on the fence with. Even though they sound better, and they're mixed better on this album, it just didn't really... all I get is Chris Barnes. All I get is just 6 feet under with the vocals, honestly. And then when you pair that with, Jamie's kind of metalcore, higher pitched, hardcore punky scream, it's gonna sound bad, but it made this song sound like a metalcore version of Rage Against the Machine. That's honestly how it was for me. So, I just do not like this song, Ride the Flatline. I think it's the weakest song, bar none, on this album. Parasite, the ending track, I did like the instrumental intro. They did try to add some like tech elements through this song, as well as like other songs on this record. You could kind of tell that they were playing around with that a little bit. And I enjoyed the soft fade, so I felt like Parasite was a fine ending song, but again, not super memorable. So for me, I think the best tracks, Release the Stench, Led to the Chamber / Liquefied, Flesh from Within, and then Defiled Gestation is okay. But really, it's those like middle tracks that were definitely better for me. I think the best thing about 200 Stab Wounds is like their instrumentation is very good. So if you are into kind of a more contemporary death metal sound that's got this bounce to it, then I think that you are probably going to like what 200 Stab Wounds puts down. I mean, like I said, they play around with a lot of breakdowns, and they really replicate a lot of some of our favorite old school death metal and BDM bands like Dying Fetus, Obituary, Death. You also get Cannibal Corpse, of course. I got a little bit of Mortician, a little bit of Suffocation in there, some tech death elements like what you get with Archspire. So it's like a whole mishmash of those bands together that it also is paired with this contemporary sound. So I do think that this is a very good record to put on when you're kind of just wanting something short and sweet, maybe to work out to. I know a lot of people have said it's a really good gym record, and I could totally see that. So just like their debut album, Manual Manic Procedures is also 9 tracks and 29 minutes long. So they're definitely staying in this pocket, short and sweet, and it's not, overstaying its welcome. So I do think, however, that this second record, Manual Manic Procedures, is not as strong as their debut, in my personal opinion. And I think that is just because the first 3 tracks did not grab me as much as their debut did. Their debut played around a lot more with these like atmospheric instrumental elements that I really, really enjoyed. There were a lot of great grooves. Now, that being said, I love that they put an instrumental track in this second record. I do think that that's very creative. And I do think that they're also a lot more fast paced in this record. They're a little bit more unforgiving, whereas like, I don't know, I feel like they were kind of leaning more towards this like slower vibe with their debut, because I got a lot of Mortician worship with their debut, where this feels very true to like classic death metal, relentless death metal, so it's still a 6 out of 10 for me though, on this second record. I just don't think it's very memorable for me, and I don't feel like I'm gonna go back really to this second album. However, Slave to the Scalpel I do think was much better. Honestly, because Skin Milk is just like going into Tow Rope Around the Throat. Like, honestly, when I first heard Tow Rope Around the Throat, I was a little on the fence. But then once I, like, really listened to Skin Milk and that transition, and then you hear that, like, guitar riff, the opening riff for Tow Rope Around the Throat, I was like, okay, girl, this has got some bounce to it. So, that's honestly the best part about this, like, contemporary revival old school death metal, is that it has bounce, girl. It's got some bounce to it, and I don't know how else to describe it, because it's like the old school death metal, the true OG old school death metal stuff has bounce. So the bounce that they've got is, like I said, it's kind of reflective of this, like, I don't know, like hip hop sound, but it's like kind of genty, it's like that like popular genty kind of sound that we're hearing with all of the stuff that's coming off of, like, the new metal and the metalcore and the deathcore bands that are hitting the TikTok, man. Not that I follow that shit, but all I'm saying is it's got that bounce. I have to say this too, I do like Slave to the Scalpel's album cover more than I like their second album. So I see myself coming back to their debut more than I see myself listening to this second record, but that's just me. So let me know down below what you think about 200 Stab Wounds and their brand new album, Manual Manic Procedures. I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Slave to the Scalpel? Do you think it's better or worse than this new album? What would you rate it out of 10? What's your rating, girl? Have you seen them live? That's the other thing too, is I have heard that 200 Stab Wounds is really, really solid live, like very tight live. If they came to Oklahoma, you can bet your bottom dollar baby girl would be seeing them, but everybody's skipping Oklahoma this year, so guess they ain't on my list, okay? You'll go 3 shows in Texas, but you won't come to Oklahoma. Okay. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, you guys.